My name is Mike Lewis, and I love this life.
You're here in Indy now, but as a boy, you grew up in Pennsylvania?
I grew up in Pennsylvania. My family loved dirt track racing, so I saw Williams Grove when I was 2. And then Reading Fairgrounds, I watched an uncle and a cousin race out at the Reading Fairgrounds with modified stock cars and had no idea what a dragster was. And my grandfather one day needed help and asked me to climb in his pickup truck, and we went out to a family field, and he tied a rope around the back tire, backed up to a public road, his property line, and then started driving and asked me to count revolutions of the tire. And as he drove across this field and then through an orchard to the other end of his property, I was counting, and then he did the calculation to figure the distance he had traveled because he had decided to build a drag strip. A local car club had convinced him that the property would lend itself well, and they showed him a lot of information. So that was really the beginning of Maple Grove Raceway, and that was across the street from where I grew up. By the time I was 12, they were racing out there, 30 feet wide, just 1/5 of a mile. But there was one local car, and it didn't make full runs, but would occasionally do a short test run. It was a nitro car, a top fuel car. And man, I've had nitro in my veins ever since. That was 1962. That set the hook. I had been announcing races at Maple Grove, and I really wanted to be a part of a top fuel team. Dave Robinson lived in a little town called Honeybrook. He and Sarge Arciero bought one of the last of the Frantic 4 cars. And so I would travel with them and just clean parts and do whatever. When Sarge left, Dave got his license, so it would often be just the two of us, and I would drive. He had this neat 56 Chevy tow car, a station wagon with an Olds 394 and a Slim Jim Hydro, and that's what we used to go racing. We went to Miami, we'd go to Connecticut, but that's kind of where I learned. And since it was just the two of us, I had to learn how to do cylinder heads and do short blocks and do the clutch and push him. There was one time in Miami where he stalled the car, and I grabbed 3 guys, and I don't know if anyone's ever done this, but we push-started a top fuel car by hand. And he made the run. And part of the deal was I wanted to make some license runs myself. And at the end of the 1969 season, I made a few runs. I wasn't very good, but it was a chance to get in the car and get a feel for it. And in 1970, I separated from that partnership, and my brother and I built our first car, and I made a couple of runs. But my father then had the idea that he and I should run Maple Grove. I had just turned 21, and I had this top fuel car with my name on it sitting in the garage. But I recognized a career opportunity. And there's a much longer version of this story. It took me a long time, but I finally agreed that it was the right thing for us to do. So we hired drivers from that point on, had an accident with the front engine car in 1971, and then built a rear engine car in 1972, and raced through most of the 70s.
That front motor top fuel car, would that have been your very first race car?
The first thing I ever timed on a racetrack. Now I had a 57 Chevy, and when nobody was looking at Maple Grove, I'd drive down the track. But the first timed run I ever made on a racetrack was actually in Englishtown in a top fuel car. And don't ask me the time because it was forgettable.
Sure.
Experience was amazing. It was a November day, and it actually snowed on the way home, and they closed the turnpike halfway home. So you remember all of these things over time, but that was my first experience in a top fuel car. There's my fire suit, one of Bill Simpson's first, and it was a hand-me-down, but still have it.
The front motored car was campaigned by other people, and then you finally got your chance in the seat in a rear engine top fuel dragster.
Well, no, I didn't drive our rear engine cars. We had a long list of drivers. Sarge Arciero drove our car, and then Fred Forkner, and then Larry Booker, and then Dale Thierer. And Dale won most, we probably won a dozen races, and Dale had 2 full years, and we had a really good relationship with Dale for a long time. Kerry Swigert drove the car for a while. It was called Sparkling Burgundy, and I never drove it. It was fitted for me, but I never drove it because I could only go to about 1/3 of the races with my brother and our drivers, and the rest of the time I was running Maple Grove. They'd get home Sunday night or Monday morning. I would go to the garage and tear everything apart and kind of put a maintenance plan together for that week, because we ran the car every week, sometimes twice a week. They would sleep in Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. By Wednesday, we were all back together, and I usually had the car back together. I did the engines, the clutch, whatever needed to be done. I did most of that work Monday and Tuesday, and then I'd wave goodbye, and Thursday they'd be gone, and I'd wait for a phone call.
Well, that's right. Back in that day, it wasn't social media and cell phones and that kind of thing. So
No.
So it was probably kind of like waiting on pins and needles to hear back race results.
Oh, it really was. It really was. The first paid appearance we had was 1972 at Englishtown, and there was a circuit called the Pro Fuel Dragster Associates. And they had one of their 8 members couldn't make the event, and we got a call, and we agreed that we would go over there. Sarge was well known. He had just been runner-up to Jimmy King at the 71 Gator Nationals, had a big fan base, so we're scheduled to go over there. So I'm still fairly young at building engines, and Kent and I took the car to Maple Grove and figured we'd unload it, test fire it, because we didn't have a self-starter. So we pushed the car, I'm in it, it sounds good, it feels good, but it had no oil pressure. So we worked till 3 in the morning and couldn't figure out what was wrong. And I looked in the corner of the garage and I had a pile of scrap. A 20 under crank, but I had the bearings, the rods for it and everything else. So we built a short block, put the heads on it, put it in the car. 8:30 they left for Englishtown. None of us slept. And so I waited for the phone to ring. And probably 8 o'clock at night, he stopped on the turnpike and called. And I said, did it blow up? And he said, yeah. I said, well, did we get to first round? Oh yeah, we won first round. Second round? Oh, we won second round. I said, wait a minute, you got to the final? Well, yeah, we won the race, but we blew it up in the lights. So that's what it was like racing in the 70s. And my brother would always kind of lean toward whatever went wrong, he would kind of start with that. Eventually I'd get the whole story. But that was our first win. First of probably a dozen. We won quite a few with, I think every one of our drivers won a divisional or a national open. We never did as well at the national events, but we did quite well at the divisional races. We had a few too many driver changes to win a division championship. We would have in 72 if we could have added Sarge's points and Fred's points, but it doesn't work that way. We won the Pro Fuel Championship with 3 different drivers. So locally, we did well, but we loved going to national events. We'd run Gainesville, we went all the way to Amarillo, but we were not equipped to compete with Don Garlitz and, you know, the better cars of the era.
So you mentioned the name Sparkling Burgundy. Where did that come from?
I have no idea. We didn't even drink wine. I didn't know what wine was. We heard of champagne. We didn't drink, to be honest. You know, we lived in the 70s and everybody's supposed to be crazy. We were so busy working on our car and then taking care of business that we didn't drink a whole lot. We didn't do much. But I had one contact at the Taylor Winery in New York, and I thought that I would pursue sponsorship, and Sparkling Burgundy kind of lent itself to a sponsorship. And we communicated back and forth, and we weren't asking for a lot of money, enough to put a spare motor together and a drum or two of fuel. And we probably would have made a deal, except my contact passed away. So we went back and started over, but that's where the name started. There's no relevance to it other than once you sort of it's like naming your dog. You know, you think about 100 names and you choose one, and that dog becomes that name. And our race cars became Sparkling Burgundy, and we brought it back. I never drove a Sparkling Burgundy car, ironically, until 2016 at the national event at Maple Grove. With Anthony DeCero's blessing, we wrapped his car in a Sparkling Burgundy design, and I put all the names of all the drivers on the cowl with my name at the bottom, and I didn't take the tape off of it until I actually made a pass in it. And ironically, Alex Laughlin became the next driver. He licensed in that car the next day, so we put his name on there. We photoshopped it in there, but I finally got to drive it. And ironically, you know, as time goes on, we raced Top Fuel in the 70s when a 620 was a good run. And we ran 520 with Anthony's car at 275. So I guess a small point of personal pride, the quickest run ever made in a Sparkling Burgundy car was my qualifying run at Maple Grove. And we were the low qualifier. We didn't do very well in eliminations, but we were low qualifier. Well, we had fun doing Sparkling Burgundy, and I wanted to honor my brother. Kent and I raced together, so we put both our names on. We've got a family picture with the entire family with the car. And Rich McPhillips' green car was perfect for the other car that I would say was probably the most popular car at Maple Grove in the early 70s, and it was called the Jade Grenade. And it was the perfect green color, and Rich agreed to cover his name with the Jade Grenade. And Rich remembered the car and was proud to do it. So he raced a Jade Grenade car, I raced the Sparkling Burgundy car, and we were lined up on the ladder where we could have made it to the final, but we didn't get there. But we had a great time, and it was a great way to honor, and there were a number of the people that drove our car. Kerry Swigert was there, our last driver. Bill Fleur from the Jade Grenade team was in the grandstand, so hopefully Bill watched it and he was proud. It was fun to do that. I wish we could do it again.
The ties with the names and the history of the cars goes back to Maple Grove. And so you spent most of your time on the management side of operating that track.
Yeah, I was 21. The track had been leased to Bob Evelyn, who did a really nice job with it in the 60s. By the 70s, the family and Bob were about 5% apart on lease terms. So while they were stalling, my father said, we should manage the track and bring it back in the family. And the family liked the idea. I was 21, and they probably wouldn't have let me do it, but they let us do it. So truth is, we took one salary and split it. We both worked for one salary, but it gave me a chance to get started in the industry. My father wasn't as passionate about it as I was, but he was passionate about helping me find a direction in life. And without that move, I was doing iron work at the time. I'd done a couple of years in college, and I'm out climbing steel, which gave me the money to build the dragster. And it would have been a career, but a little bit more dangerous and a little bit less of an adventure. And so I recognized that, and I've been blessed. That gave me the opportunity. And yeah, I managed Maple Grove from 1971 until halfway through 1989. And during that time, we grew from a little cornfield track with a divisional race to a national event track, to a track that, I mean, we had Chevy events, Ford events, major corporate partnerships, and Maple Grove was on the map.
Well, Maple Grove has a tradition and a history of being one of the quickest tracks in the country.
Right, and always has been. I mean, we're out there among all those trees, and anyone that knows horticulture or whatever, trees emit oxygen, and it does make a difference, I think. It's not a downhill track. There's no tricks to it. The original track was paved with a real fine grit asphalt, Trinidad Bay asphalt, that's not even available anymore. But the traction was so good Al Segrini was right behind Don Prudhomme, who made the first 5-second run in the funny car. And about 2 months later, the next 5-second run was Al Segrini at one of our events at Maple Grove. In 1982, I believe it was, Connie Coletta made the quickest top fuel run in history. And it was at an NHRA event and would have been a national record had he backed it up. But we only had one nighttime run, and the daytime runs weren't as good. But historically, and especially during the national event years, we'd seen a lot of milestones. The Joe Amatos in the early days, Corey Mack, Bob Glidden was always lowering his personal best, and which his personal best happened to be the class best. He would run the first ever 750 and the first ever 740, and we couldn't wait 1 year to the next to see what would happen. And we were blessed by great performances.
The opportunity that you had at Maple Grove led you to other opportunities in the sport.
Dallas Gardner contacted me in December of 1988 and asked if I'd be interested in going to work for NHRA. And he hinted about maybe a stop in Indianapolis, but he really had his sights set on me taking on a role in California. My girls were 12 and 15 at the time, 13 and 16 by the time we did make that move. And we ended up agreeing that I would come to California. That was the summer of '89. And I worked for 6 months under the direction of Bertie Partridge, who was one of the original division directors. He was the national field director, vice president of field operations, and he was scheduled to retire at the end of the '89 season. So I worked with Bernie and his wife PJ and a staff in the field office, and then took over that role as vice president of field in first of 1990. So that was my role with NHRA, and it was terrific. I was blessed to work with not just Dallas Gardner, but Graham Light, Steve Gibbs, and a whole group of really quality people. I was one of 4 people on the competition committee, and I was challenged to start a youth and education program. And there was already a group of educators that had semi-organized, so we called them together and we started the Career Opportunity Fair that became the YES program of today. I worked with all of our division directors, and then after a year or two I took on overseeing all of the NHRA owned tracks. So it was a great opportunity, but involved a lot of travel. And then in 1995 there was an opening in the GM slot here in Indianapolis at Indianapolis Raceway Park. I offered to Dallas to manage the field office from Indy during that summer because, I mean, there was NASCAR racing, the Super Chevy event was, 30,000 people, and the Mopar Nationals was even bigger. So I said, Dallas, if you need someone to oversee Indy, or IRP as we called it then, I can do that and manage the field department. And he said, well, I've been meaning to talk to you. I'd like you to consider moving to Indy and taking that on as a permanent assignment. That was a big change. My daughters were 19 and 22 in California. I'd gone through a separation, and so I thought about it for a short time, but not long. With the field office, I was overseeing 47 people, and there was a big HR component to what I was doing. And that didn't exactly qualify as my passion. I loved racing, I loved events, I loved marketing the events. And with Indianapolis, I'd have the opportunity to do that with NASCAR, with USAC, and of course with the US Nationals. So I took it. And I've never looked back. I've never left Indianapolis. It was a very significant move in my life. My younger daughter, Allie, a few years later, also moved here and went to work for, of all people, Don Schumacher. My older daughter, Jennifer, is married and lives in Carlsbad, California. So I visit Jen and her husband Jeff whenever we have the opportunity. Allie's engaged to Mike Neff, who is Bob Tasker's crew chief. So they travel where I travel. So we see a lot of each other, although not so much in the middle of quarantine, but we were just all, Zippy's got an off-road truck, and he and his son just won the Mint 400. So that was the last major event that we attended before all of this quarantine started. It was great to see them out in the desert doing something completely opposite what we all do with drag racing, but we watched them win. So it's all good.
Well, there's a lot of crossover in motorsports between different disciplines, and being in Indianapolis, you get exposure to a lot of those different disciplines as well. IndyCar coming to mind.
Well, I was blessed that at the time that I came here, the NASCAR races at Indy were sellouts. We would do a Silver Crown race on a Thursday night, what was then, well, the Truck Series on Friday, the Busch Series, which is now the Xfinity Series. We married all of those events. They each had individual sponsors, DuPont, Cummins, and Kroger, and it became the Kroger Speed Fest. And the relationship we had with all of them was, it was as rewarding as anything I've done, I think, personally, because even though we were owned by NHRA, the NHRA marketing department didn't really get involved except at the Nationals. In that case, we stood back and supported, what they brought from Glendora. But to be able to do all of those things and create those partnerships, and Eileen Daniels still ran our hospitality, and she had probably the best hospitality in NASCAR. It was just beautifully done. We had events, the Cummins event the first year, we had 900 Cummins guests. And a smaller group of them were their VIP guests who were bused to IRP. And they had a big, beautiful tent with linens. We had a spectacular dinner. And then finished with kind of hors d'oeuvres and drinks till the crowd dissipated, and then they would get in their bus and go back to Columbus, Ohio, or Columbus, Indiana. So being a part of all of those things and working within the teamwork here, Patty DeBold ran our ticketing department and did so, I mean, in this world today, we have Ticketmaster and e-tix and you name it. She was one of the pioneers of organizing group sales and group ticketing, and we sold out every year. And by the time I left, Patty was taking care of ticketing, not just for the IRP races, but for the Pomona races, the Gainesville races, the Atlanta races. Pretty much anywhere that NHRA sold a ticket, it went through our little modular office out there near the railroad tracks. So it was a very dynamic group of people. And that came to an end in 1998, unfortunately. And I was pretty bummed, didn't know what I was going to do next. And that evening at dinner, that same evening, I was at dinner and my phone rang. And it was Don Schumacher. And I'd become good friends with Tony because Tony had his alcohol car and we'd frequent the same places. We both rode Harleys, and Tony and Don were putting together DSR, and Don asked if I'd like to be a part of it. So I formed my own company and I consulted with him. I didn't take that as a full-time position for 3 years. I did a pretty much a full-time contract with PRO for 2 years, and I began to watch DSR grow into 1 car and then 2 and then 3, and I knew Don's history running 3 funny cars in the early 70s, and it became pretty apparent that Don's place in this sport was going to be unprecedented in terms of the number of teams, the number of employees, and the opportunity for me to be a part in managing his business. In 2002, after my daughter had already been there for 2 years, I drove up to Don's office and said, yes, let's do it.
So you had some inkling that this would become what it was, but did you really imagine that it would become one of the crown jewels in the NHRA world?
I couldn't have imagined that we would be doing the things that we've done since 2002. The Army was already Tony's sponsor. We had Matt Coe on what was at that time the Whit Bazemore funny car. The more I talked with Don, the more I realized he was looking at the NASCAR model, he was looking at other models, but he was just a very ambitious person. And when I was managing PRO as executive director, when my phone rang and it was Don Schumacher, it was usually something he didn't like about what PRO was doing or wasn't doing, and he had a vision for the sport. He wanted this sport to be the biggest motorsport on earth. And he wanted our sponsors, not just the DSR sponsors, but all sponsors, to be able to entertain their guests in a unique environment. And I think Don almost singularly took the idea of hospitality at NHRA and created a hospitality for hundreds of guests, where Napa could incentivize sales in a marketplace prior to an event, and the reward would be invitations to attend Napa hospitality with Ron Capps on race day. He was doing that with the Army, and the Army program was all about recruiting, and we did a lot of recruiting activities in hospitality where potential recruits and their families could meet Tony, could meet a soldier hero, and could learn the Army story. So being a part of all of that was really exciting. And every time that Don would visualize a new partnership, part of his story was, we need to bring people to the track, we need to engage people. It's not just putting your name in the car and letting people in their living rooms see a Fram top fuel dragster or a Brute funny car. He wanted their guests to witness it in person. He made our drivers available generally on Thursdays prior to events. Tony would be at a school recruiting for the Army. Ron Capps would doing a Brute appearance, and since 2008 he's done Napa appearances almost every Thursday of every event all over the country. Antron is in a Matco truck out there making sales calls. Leah, during the Papa John's era, actually delivered pizza. So it's getting our drivers engaged, getting our fans involved. And yeah, we were all responsible, our marketing team, our front office team, but a lot of that was Don's thinking, Don's ideas at a meeting, and he's not bashful. If he believes something, he's going to sell it, and in most cases, his vision has proven to be very good for our sponsors. It's kept us busy, which is a good thing. We've got a fleet of show cars all over the country. We built simulator show cars where you can climb in a Napa car or the mellow yellow car that's on the Midway at the national events. We built that where you can get in the seat of an actual funny car, put a headset on, hear what the driver hears, and with help from the people that make butt kickers, and we put some big woofers and tweeters, and we put a big screen so you're not looking out the window, but you feel like you're seeing what Ron Capps sees when he's making his burnout and backing up, and you go 330 miles an hour, pull the chutes, get off the end of the track, and you get out and have a lot more of a feeling for what the drivers go through. To the lay person, somebody watching at home, we only go in a straight line. You hit the gas, count to 3, pull the chutes, and look for a place to park. When you're in the car, and Ron now on at least once every event wears a pair of glasses, and there's an HD camera on the bridge of his nose, basically, that shows the viewer exactly what Ron sees. He went 339 at Maple Grove in the fall of 18, and we've all seen what it's like to go 339 miles an hour at night at Maple Grove. So it's all part of the DSR experience. I mean, in the old days, the drivers who were the superstars of NASCAR, IndyCar, or NHRA were also the owners, the decision makers. They would drive the trucks and trailers, build the engines, negotiate whatever deals. And so they were, in the era where I grew up, they were superstars. Today, the driver represents a brand, represents the sponsors, represents the team owner. So Don, in choosing the drivers, has to make sure he trusts, and obviously we have implicit trust in all the drivers. You know, when Leah's out delivering a Mopar, a Pennzoil message, or Hagen or Caps is delivering his message for Napa, they're representing DSR. And there's morals clauses and all those things in all of our contracts. But the group of drivers that we've had over the years, and especially today, these are the best representatives, the best brand ambassadors that I've ever worked with. They understand the mission. They understand that, frankly, the more they can do with fan engagement, the more they can prolong and enhance their own careers. So they understand that. And it's not just, you know, a playbook. It's from the heart. I mean, you look at Ron Capps talking to a group of Napa guests, he bleeds Napa blue. And it's the same with all of our drivers. Well, Ron wanted to run, I mean, he actually tested with IROC back in the 90s. Those of you that remember the IROC series, Ron wanted to be the drag racing ambassador to compete against the best from NASCAR and IndyCar and USAC and World of Outlaws. He did last Wednesday, finally, and finished fifth. Made us all proud, but I don't know when Ron sleeps. Ron is just engaged with fans through social media, through personal appearances, and even though we're quarantined, I mean, he's all over the internet, and he's engaging as a person. I mean, nobody does a better job. But I can say the same thing to one extent or another for all of our drivers. I mean, Jack's doing his thing with his El Camino, so people that love muscle cars, I mean, Jack's a for real guy. And he's doing whatever he can for the Infinite Hero Foundation and still helping them raise funds for injured soldiers. Tommy Johnson was on with Joe Costello yesterday, so he's constantly doing things to promote the MD Anderson Cancer Center. So all of the drivers are out there, they're engaged, and Leah blows everybody away when it comes to social media. She knew as a teenager that she wanted to be a professional drag racer, and her family didn't have the funding to just put her in a car. She knew she would have to market herself. So she got degrees in both marketing and communications, and she's put that education to work. One of my driving experiences was in Bakersfield, licensing in Joel Gruzin's Altered, and she was behind me in her Altered. She was 18, I was 58. And she would give me directions and counsel. She had probably made 100 or 200 runs, and I'm making my first runs in a blown alcohol Fiat. But I've learned that she's precocious, always has been, and she's intuitive on recognizing opportunities. Shortly after that experience, she asked me at Pomona, would I introduce her to Don Schumacher? And Don took a liking to her right away because of the experience she had from junior dragsters all the way up through, by that time her family had an alcohol funny car. So Don took a liking to her and gave her the opportunity to run 300 and license in one of the DSR funny cars. It took a while to put all the funding together, and she did a good job winning with Pro Mod cars, with Nostalgia funny cars, did a good job with the Dote family's top fuel car. But she's incredible as a representative of DSR, and her numbers on social media, we'll get into that I'm sure in a moment. We measure all of those numbers. Hookit measures those numbers across all of sports. Leah is one of the highest rated female athletes in the world in terms of her social media metrics, and that adds value, which enables her to do what she really wants to do, and that's drive a race car. So you've got to learn all of those things to be able to have the opportunity to do what you really want to do, and that's to go out and compete on the drag strip.
So when you're in that process of talking to a sponsor, what is that value proposition to them? What do you talk about as the total deliverable?
Over the years, we've talked about fan engagement trackside, fan engagement in the marketplace, special appearances, appearances by the drivers at sales conventions, or all those things. We still do all of those. Television is measured by Nielsen these days. I mean, we hear the name Joyce Julius. Joyce Julius first came up with the way of identifying clear in-focus exposure of logos on a TV screen, on a race car, on a fire suit, on a wall, or whatever. But today, Hookit measures all of those things, and I'm sure there's others that measure all of the value on social media and can now break it down into demographics of the audience that engages with a particular post on social media. So we measure all of those things, and we now tailor our social media posting and all the content to an audience that we're trying to reach via social media. And we've got to be entertaining. I mean, companies can buy advertising on social media, but they've got to be creative. What we do is provide, okay, technically it's an endorsement, but it's a chance for all of our drivers to pitch an audience on their products and services and the people who back DSR. And we do that in very creative ways, sometimes by telling really bad jokes, other times by engaging with people at an appearance. Sometimes it works out for the best, and sometimes we don't get to post some of those things. But you're constantly looking for ideas. Ashley Keller handles our social media posting and is very creative. We've learned that if you want to really have a lasting impact, you do it with a video, not just with words or even words with a still shot or a group of still shots, but a creative video. And it's got to be 15 seconds, maybe a little more or less, but it's got to be short, to the point, and then people move on. But that'll leave a lasting impression, and one that can be measured. And now, I mean, that's a big part of the value that we have to deliver to our sponsors.
You're a very well-spoken guy, and you can stand in front of a crowd and deliver a message. You had to have started honing that skill back at Maple Grove, behind the microphone.
Well, I started in 4th grade. I was the shyest kid anywhere. My 4th grade teacher signed me up to deliver a speech to an Optimist club. And I remember the shoes I was wearing, and I remember the fabric of the carpet of the floor, because I stood in front of this audience of about 15 people, and I stared at my feet. Some years later, when I think I had just turned 15, the announcer at Maple Grove was ill, and the backup announcer was on vacation. And there's a Top Fuel match race, and I'm working in concessions, but I would run to the fences to hear the nitro cars and feature cars, and I hear my voice, my grandfather's voice, on the PA system calling me to the tower. And I thought, I must be in trouble. But I couldn't think of anything. I wasn't goofing off. Anyway, I walked up, he handed me a microphone and said, "I need you to announce," and turned and walked away. I couldn't, why? I mean, I was scared to death. I looked out the windows at a crowd of what looked like an Indy 500 crowd. It was probably 2,500 people. And I thought, God, I'm supposed to talk into this thing? Eventually I said a few words and it didn't hurt. And I was encouraged by a couple of the people working up there, and I survived that day and had a few more opportunities, and then realized I mean, it was a great way to be involved, to study every single run down the track and to share insights. And I didn't think of it in those terms. It was just a chance to be involved. There's no ego involved, because I was pretty embarrassed at first. But I realized I needed to take some speech courses, which I did in high school. And then in college, I took the Dale Carnegie program several times and became one of the instructors in Reading for a period of time, and just learned to hone my skills. And the biggest thing I think I did over the years is I would listen to voices. I would listen to announcers. Dick Enberg was one of my favorites. Al Michaels, Mike Tirico are national voices that are clear, crisp, to the point. Vin Scully of the Dodgers. I would listen to him when Sirius Radio came out. I would try my best to find a Dodger game to listen to Vin Scully. Tom Carnegie at the Speedway was a man, sometimes a few words, but great impact. And then in our world, Bernie Partridge was NHRA's original announcer, and I was blessed to get to know Bernie, and ironically then to take on his role as in the field department of NHRA when he retired. We had Dave McClelland and Steve Evans. Dave had this incredible, powerful voice, and Steve could speak in color with the insights that he had, just his personal intuition and the extra time that he would put into talking to drivers and crew chiefs, getting the stories behind the stories. So the next day on a top-end interview, he could weave that into his storyline just seamlessly. And those guys were great. They were the voices of NHRA. Bob Fry took that role and delivered. I mean, Bob was a great ambassador for NHRA. Alan Reinhart worked his way up through the ranks and is a great voice for NHRA today. To be one of those voices was a great honor. I think I announced NHRA races 23 years. I did a couple of Indy 500s on the broadcast team. That may be in the rearview mirror, but I'm really excited, and not by the vision I had from the announcing deck, and not by some grandiose idea that there were people listening in the audience, but by the opportunities I had to be close to drivers and close to, I was one of the first, after Bob Glidden rolled 9 times, I watched him get out of his car, take his jacket off and cover up his intake manifold, and I got to talk with him. When Don Garlitz did the backflip at Englishtown, by the time he got out of his car and the Safari checked out that he was at least healthy enough to do an interview, I had the opportunity to do that for a live audience. You know, and it wasn't my voice that people listened to. I was just the messenger. I got to interview Billy Meyer, 1992 at the Texas Motorplex. I'm just announcing and there's an oil down, and I hear some people walk in behind me. It was Billy Meyer, and Billy says, Mike, this is George W. Bush. He's running for governor of Texas. I'd like if you could spend a few minutes with him. Well, I knew who George W. Bush was, of course, because of his father. I didn't know much about Texas politics, but what an opportunity. We spent 10 minutes, and George W. Bush, by the way, was the most engaging interview I've ever done. He looked at you in the eye and he spoke to you like we are now, just two people having a conversation without regard to talking points and the fact that there was an audience of potential voters out there. And I've never forgotten that. I mean, what a great opportunity. And those are blessings that go back to my 4th grade teacher, my grandfather, my father for getting me involved in the sport, Wally Parks, who gave me the opportunity to announce in 1977 in Columbus, and the other announcers that I've met over the years are all great friends. We've lost a few along the way. Leo Tower was a great friend. Everybody in Division III loved Leo Tower. So it's a fraternity that I'm proud to still be a part of. Maybe the word emeritus follows my name because I haven't been active. But to be able to broadcast a sport that you love, to be able to be in a position where John Force bounced off the wall racing, I think it was Ed McCulloch, at the Motorplex, trying to win a championship, and he gets out of the car, and I was there before Steve Evans. Steve was doing TV, so Force says, you gotta let me tell everybody I'm okay. You gotta let, of course, Force is Force. So then Steve takes over, and about 10 minutes later, Force grabs me from behind, turns me around, he says, you gotta let me tell everybody I'm okay. I said, John, we just did. I mean, he had his bell rung that day. I mean, so those memories I'll take with me for the rest of my life.
Who do you look to as a mentor or a great influence in your life?
Obviously Don Schumacher, because I spent a lot of time with him watching how he develops business, plans business, negotiates, and so forth. From a broadcasting standpoint, I think I've listed the people that I really look up to. My wife Vicki really day to day is my partner. We didn't meet until I was well into my 50s. We got married, I was 60. It's now 10 years. Just to start and finish every day with her, and today especially because she's done what you do for Channel 6 here in Indy for 20 some years. She's been a blessing for me. My daughters, Jen and Allie, are two people that I respect, and when it's time to make a decision on what's right, what's wrong, people are kind of pulling you in one direction. I think, what would they think? And my mother just turned 100, and God bless her, she's still as sharp as a tack, and I can still have a conversation with her, which I will when we finish today, and I can still, she'll laugh at something almost every time we talk. She put herself through college, took a trolley and a bus, 30 miles each way, each day. Sounds like a story from a Norman Rockwell era movie or something like that, but that was Mom. And when she made her mind up to do something, she did it. She didn't second guess. She didn't ever self-doubt, and she didn't ever complain. She worked very hard. She worked till she was 95. She's in a assisted living these days. We lost my father in 2000. But she's never lost her faith in her family, her friends, people around her. And she makes people feel good about themselves. And I would hope a little of that maybe has worn off on me. I think a lot about her every day. And she was captain of her college basketball team, but never told us. We didn't know that until we moved her into assisted living and went through a whole host of archives. And here's a picture of my mom holding the basketball. She was as humble as anyone I know. My father never talked about his military career. He was a gunner in the Philippines for MacArthur and fought the Battle of Luzon. Never talked about it. Retired after 4 years as a corporal, but had 4 brown stars. Never knew that. My mother never knew that. They didn't meet until after he retired from the Army, and so to find that out all these years later, after working with the Army and DSR for 17 years, I find out that my own father had his own decorations and never said a word. So I think maybe I don't claim to be as humble as my parents, but I love lessons in humility. I love people who do things for the right reasons, and I've been blessed to grow up in that kind of environment. My grandfather, the day that he said, "I need you to announce," he was a very soft-spoken, stern German man, and there was no second guessing. It wasn't like, "Do you think you could maybe try to announce for a little?" He said, "I need you to announce," and he walked away. He knew I could do it, but I didn't. So I've been blessed by people like that trust me. And I've kind of heard a few of those voices in more recently in driving race cars for people like Paul Smith, for Tom Conway, Anthony. Anthony's a little bit more effervescent in his communications, but when people tell you what to do and trust that you can do it, it kind of takes me back to people that I've looked up to over life that knew that I could do things that I didn't know that I could do. But I had to learn how to do those things and get them done. And there's a lot more stories. I've been blessed by family. I've been blessed by my family today includes Vicki, my daughters, and my son-in-law. Vicky's family here in Indy is my family, includes 4 grandkids that I love. But my family at DSR is a family. We travel together. We call each other when we need whatever, a recipe. I mean, we call each other just for fun. So it's not just work. I still have an NHRA family. I've got a neighborhood family. I'm blessed with a family on this earth that I care about and that I feel cared for.
Well, one thing that you mentioned to me recently is a mantra that's kind of come up in big moments in your life where somebody has said something to you that really motivated.
3 words.
3 words.
3 words. The first time I heard those 3 words, they came from Frank Hawley. In 2 different levels of the drag racing school. Jack Beckman actually in Super Comp, Frank in Alcohol Dragster. Then I heard Tom Conway say them. And we went to the final round of the first 2 races I ever competed at a national event driving his car. And Tom doesn't say much, but I heard those same 3 words. And over time I heard Paul Smith say those 3 words, Anthony DeCero 3 words, and I've stood back and I've listened to crew chiefs for DSR say, it's just real simple. You get your helmet on, you're in the car, all the work is done, you're pointed on the racetrack, the crew chiefs are waiting for the race master to say, start your engines. And then you hear those 3 words, here we go. And at that point your heart is pumping. Mine slows down a little bit because I've always loved operating machinery. Lawnmowers, tow motor, I don't care what it is. Driving a race car is the ultimate. But it's about to be my turn. Here we go. And those words stick in my mind. I can hear Tom Conway's voice, and I can hear every other crew chief that I've driven for. They all seem to say the same thing. Here we go.
So when you were in track management, did you feel like you missed out on an opportunity to drive the car, or did those chances come later?
I never gave it a thought. Once I hung up my helmet, I never wished I was driving a race car. I loved running the racetrack, raising my family, had too many other things going on. I did a skydive with my daughters and with Vicky. That was in 2004. And it was great that we would all come together and share this incredible experience. So a couple years later, I thought it'd be great to take my daughters and go super comp racing. Something they had never done, something I hadn't done for a long time. So we did that. But one thing led to another this time. Joel Grusin asked me to drive his Blown Altered, which got me up to 185. And then a year later, I think it was in 2008, I went to Frank Hawley School in Florida and drove the Alcohol Dragster and went 230 a couple of times. And then at Frank's encouragement, thought I'd look for an opportunity to race at a national event. I'd pretty much done everything from pick up the trash to sell the tickets to announce the races, but I had never competed. So in 2008, I made a deal with Tom Conway and drove his car at Maple Grove. And I wasn't very good in qualifying. We finally did qualify number 3, and I won a couple rounds on hole shots. I didn't even know if I could cut a light. And we lost in the final to Marty Thacker. But God, what an incredible experience. Not cheap, but a great experience. So I put some money together with some sponsorship and did 2 events the next year, and we were runner-up again in Reading. Should have won, but had a fuel line come loose and watched Dwayne Shields go to the finish line. Should have won the U.S. Nationals. Ran 5:21 and 2:72 beside Dwayne Shields. But I red lighted, and I learned that ultimate disappointment. I could tell stories on so many different runs, but I had opportunities through Tom Conway, and then Justin Grant gave me an opportunity to drive his Wonder Wagon funny car, which we then repainted Stardust. I drove for Bob Godfrey in Bakersfield. And then Henry Gutierrez gave me an opportunity to drive the Brand X car. Paul Smith was the crew chief, and I've known Paul since almost the day he started. So to be able to stage the car at Bakersfield and look up at Paul Smith and think, this guy's my crew chief? The smile inside my helmet was incredible. And then I'd think, okay, focus. And I'd look at the tree, and we won that race over 30-some cars in 2012. So I was blessed to have some opportunities later, all during my late 50s and 60s, to do something I never thought I'd ever get a chance to do. And I learned today, when I look at our drivers at DSR, or any of the other drivers out there, for years I would look at the car. Once the driver's in the car, the driver's part of the car, you look at the car, and you talk in terms of what the car does. Today I know there's a beating heart in there. And this sport, in its most pure sense, is all about the mechanical challenge of building a vehicle to take a human being down the drag strip as quick and as fast as possible. The last person in that chain of command is the driver, who cuts a good light, hopefully, keeps the car in the groove, and turns on the wind light. And any driver will tell you they can't necessarily make a bad car go much faster, but they can sure screw up a good car if they aren't perfectly focused. And so that's the challenge the driver has. And I understand now the last thing the driver sees is not just the crew chief, but you feel the work of all the crew around you. And when you have the chemistry that they trust you and you trust them, you can do anything. The year that we won Bakersfield, Albert would buckle me into the car, Alex would clean everything around the outside of the car and give Paul a thumbs up. Henry would stand back, and there were Henry's cars, and he was so proud. And when Paul was done and you'd stage the car, and I felt like I could beat anybody. And we got lucky and we won that race that year. And that's a feeling that, I mean, I've played a lot of sports, but I've finished a few times on a podium, but I've never been a superstar. I've never been somebody who, you know, would be your go-to guy, you know, the Larry Bird who takes the last shot. But for that one day, I felt like that. So I'm grateful to Henry. We lost Henry a couple of years ago, God bless him. But to all the crew chiefs that had faith in me to let me drive their cars, and especially Henry Gutierrez on that day in 2012 in Bakersfield, thank you. You made me feel like a superstar. Thanks for that opportunity.
Your experience in Bakersfield has sometimes put your team to the test. I recall seeing a picture of one particular body shredding incident, and that was really a test of your team as well.
Yeah, that came about fairly late in the year. I drove Anthony DeSero's A-Fuel car a few times. Anthony knew Cecil Matthews and Randy Lucchetti, who had just bought the Nitro Nick car from Nick Bonifani on the East Coast, a car that I knew very well, and I grew up with Nick. So here I am in Bakersfield driving this car. I fly in, put my gear on, go through tech, sign the tech card, and pretty soon it's time to warm up and then go to the lanes and qualify. So I'm still trying to get to know everybody by name, including the guy buckling me in. We leave the starting line at about 500 or 600 feet. I hear the engine sneeze and put a rod out, backfired the blower, and the next thing I knew, the body just slowly peeled off, and I don't know how high it went, 100 feet in the air. It seemed like it happened in slow motion. No big bang. It sneezed, and I could see daylight, and all of a sudden it was gone. And I stop in this convertible with a blown engine. And I still don't know how to say Randy's last name. And I think, God, these guys are going to kill me. But they came down there and they said, Anthony said, you know, we have another engine. Well, yeah, what are we going to do with this body? The body was in pieces. The whole right side of the body was gone. And then Lawton Ferreira walked up and said, there were 2 or 3 other guys before him, and they didn't know what they were talking about. They said, oh, we can glue it back together. But Lawton said, no, I can fix this car. He fixed Corvettes for 30 years in a shop in San Diego. he knew how to work with fiberglass. So Randy and Cecil said, let's do it. So Anthony got the backup motor ready, and his group of guys put all of the car back together. And then Lawton and his son Lot, and they raced a 7.0 Pro car, they started very methodically, of course, a trip to Lowe's for sheet metal and rivets and all kinds of stuff, and Bondo, and they methodically put the body back together so that it would fit on the frame. And then they glued the side, the right side that was missing was filled with rivets and glue, but it was in place. It wasn't pretty, kind of Frankenstein, but it was in place. So at 1 o'clock in the morning, the only thing left to do was let the glue harden. So we all went back and got a pretty good night's sleep. And then the next morning we put the body on the chassis. Then that was kind of a moment of truth to see if it would fit. I mean, it took a little juggling, but it fit okay. So we got everything else ready, warmed up, and nobody expected to see us in the staging lanes. So we pulled in, we were maybe the last car in line, only 2 runs to qualify, and we're not in the show. So people are looking like, how'd you guys, I mean, it was amazing. We put it together. So we get to the starting line, start the engine, and my heart's pumping. I'm thinking, we're gonna put this thing in the show, we're gonna get it done. So they dropped the body, and Anthony's trying to, and it wouldn't quite latch. And about 15 seconds went by where I'm holding the brake thinking, dear Lord, help us make this run. So anyway, it did eventually latch. We went up and won a 589, which qualified 11th. So, I mean, it was a bonding moment for 18 guys that had really poured their hearts and souls into this car. So that gave us Chris Crable first round, and Chris was racing against Dan Horan. One of the 2 of them would be the Heritage Series champion. And I've got to race Chris. And I've raced him, I haven't raced him before, but I've followed his career and I know he's really quick on the lights. So I'm thinking I've only got one chance to beat him, and that's to step up my game. So somehow he cut an 052 light, and I cut an 030. And I beat him. I think I ran 586, he ran 585, and we went to the second round. And I felt bad. It put him out of the points championship. It made Dan Horan the champion. He still says, Dan, if you're watching, you owe me dinner. But it was an amazing opportunity. It was probably the best single day I've ever spent at a racetrack, just because we took scrap and we turned it into something that was competitive. I mean, it was a 73 Vega body. It was basically aerodynamically a brick, but somehow with 18 people working together, and I've got a great picture of all of us with our hands together in the pits. Looked like a basketball team getting ready to go out for after their final timeout, but it was that kind of emotion that we felt for each other, and to have the opportunity to then be the driver of that race car on that day. Cecil Matthews and Randy Lucchetti and that whole crew will be friends for life. They just won the March meet with Matt Bynum driving, and I'm proud of what they've done as nitro racers. They had been gasser racers for a lot of years and had to learn how to compete with nitro, and they've done it. But they gave me an incredible day, an incredible opportunity. And after all that, Ron Johnson said, I need someone to cackle the chiseler. If you've ever been to Bakersfield at the reunion in the days that 80 cars were in a cackle fest, to be in Chris Karamessini's chiseler right next to Tommy Ivo, that was a day I'll never forget.
Well, during your time at NHRA, you had the opportunity to help create that series that you got to race in.
Yeah, one of the tracks that I supervised was Bakersfield. Steve Gibbs had an office next to mine, and we would often talk about, small talk about odds and ends. And I had been to a nostalgia race. I think NHRA ran a couple of top fuel cars at Bakersfield. And I had a chance to see nostalgia top fuel for the first time in a long time. And it was pretty impressive. I really enjoyed it. Jerry Steiner was up there, and a lot of the guys, Ted Taylor and some of the people who really brought back nostalgia top fuel racing. And Steve said, you know, I'm tired of seeing all my old friends at funerals. We need to do a reunion. And so Steve organized a group of people, Wally and Barbara Parks, Marilyn Lockman, George Phillips, myself. Warren Smith was running the track with the Schoonover family at the time, and there were quite a few more people involved. But we just kind of got our heads together and thought, our sport really needs a reunion. We didn't know where it was going to be or how often. It ended up being at Bakersfield, and it's ended up being for 27 years every year. But we didn't know that that's what was going to happen. We started out with just a concept, 8 top fuel cars, 8 junior fuel cars, a couple of gassers. That's all that went down the racetrack, and the rest of it was social. A big tent in the middle. We ran out of tri-tip beef with probably 600 people still standing in line to eat. And a couple of people started complaining, and then they realized in the middle of the line was Wally and Barbara Parks. And they waited until, I mean, we went to grocery stores all over Bakersfield and bought every tri-tip we could, and we got through the day. But it has become an amazing event. It honors the champions of not just California, but all over the country. And to compete there in Bob Godfrey's car for the first time in 11, man, I just felt like I was, you know, it was the greatest day of my life. And then to have the opportunity to win it a year later, and I think I've competed there 5 times. It's a funny track for me. I've made a dozen 5-second runs in the left lane. I've never made a single 5-second run in the right lane. The only place I've ever crossed the center line was twice at the March meet from the right lane, so I never qualified at the March meet. I did a wheel stand beside Chad Head. On the day that we won, we were lucky. Chad smoked the tires in the semifinals. I carried the front wheels well past 330, probably 3 feet in the air, and pedaled it. Had no business winning that round. It was the only time I've ever turned on a right lane wind light in Bakersfield. I mean, I ran a 6 flat on one run, but the throttle linkage fell off. So on that final round, besides Stephen Densham, Stephen was really quick in 2012. He had lane choice. When he pulled into the right lane and I had a chance to go to the left lane, I thought, we got this. And I had another 030 light on that run, and he had some fuel line problems, and we ran 578 and won it. But it was sort of, I mean, I can run the right lane at Maple Grove, I can run the right lane at Indy, but the right lane at Bakersfield, for some reason, things never go so well.
One of the things that you talked about out at Bakersfield is the opportunity for them to honor people out there in the Grove.
Yep.
But you've got a couple of honors that you should be proud of as well. I see the International Drag Racing Hall of Fame induction over there.
Yeah, I'm very proud of that. It was a great honor in 2019 to be inducted into the International Drag Racing Hall of Fame, to have 5 tables of people there from DSR, from Napa headquarters, from my family, and some of my old friends that I haven't seen for 30 years. Bill Simpson, and God bless him, had 3 tables back in the corner, and they were all friends. It was the most humbling experience of my life, and I'm very proud of that trophy. And the one next to it as well is a trophy commemorating 80 victories for Tony Schumacher driving the Army top fuel car. And there's a dog tag that is a commemorative dog tag for maybe the greatest soldier I've ever met. His name was Lieutenant Colonel Robert Friend. Flew with the Red Tails in the Tuskegee as a Tuskegee Airman, and would still come to the races at 96. Great man, great heart. To have the opportunity to spend time with him, and to this day with his family, and they gave me a copy of his dog tag. these are opportunities that, I mean, I can't compare with how people feel about their opportunities, but I've been very blessed to meet the people I've met, to have the experiences that I've had, to be here to talk about them. I know we've gone on way too long, but I love this life.